Good evening, everybody. What is up? Welcome. It is time for College Football After Dark. It is the show here on Grinders Live, devoted exclusively to college football. We love it. It's a big week in college football. We've got a six-figure payout tournament over on DraftKings, so that's making everybody excited, definitely us here at Roto Grinders and on College Football After Dark. So we'll be talking about a lot of those games and those matchups for sure, because there's a lot of people pining, I think, for that $15,000 first place prize. Pretty good payout in that tournament altogether. So thanks to DraftKings for putting that together for us college football folk. I am Dan Bach. You know me from the podcast, SiriusXM Fantasy Sports Radio, and a myriad of other places. And happy to be with you here on the show this Thursday night. And Head Chopper needed the week off, so we decided to go to the bullpen and bring in the man that was Candia on Daily Joust before Candia even existed. He goes by a bunch of different usernames out there. We know him here on Grinders as Hesters 8157, but I like to call him Jesse. Jesse Anderson, what's up, my man? How are you?
Good. How about you, Dan?
Not bad. Have you ever been introduced as the Candia of Daily Joust? I'm betting that is the first.
That is the first time. And when it's referred to with Daily Joust, it's on a pretty minuscule scene compared to FanDuel.
Yes, but back in the day, you owned that lobby, my man. You played in just about everything over there, and were one of the best players on that site. But you are an old school grinder, which is cool. You know, there's a lot of people who are new, kind of getting into the industry. Before we kind of get into college football, give everybody a little bit of your background as a daily fantasy guy and a college daily fantasy guy.
All right. Well, I started up when the thing first started up. I was a big year-long guy that used to play on all the sites, and when I first joined, the main players were probably myself, Primetime, and Kaiser Roll, and Primetime everyone still knows about. Kaiser, some of the guys that have been around for a few years know him, and he was one of the best. He was a very good player, stepped back from the industry a little bit, but we kind of squared off a lot on Fantasy Sports Live, 365 Fantasy Sports. That's where a lot of the early action was done, but the big tournaments back then were if we could get a 20-man to fill, we were doing pretty good. So it's came a long ways since then. So.
Wow, you are the oldest of the old school. I didn't realize you went that far back. That's crazy. Now, we were happy when we had 20-man tournaments, and now people are playing for millions of dollars and $100,000 here in college football. And college was something that really didn't sprout up until a couple of years ago. I think Joust was maybe the first to have brought college to the forefront. Now, have you always been a college football and sports fan, or kind of talk about the transition into doing that, because there really isn't a whole lot of crossover from season-long college to daily?
Well, the crossover there was a few sites that played, and I think it was a legality thing more than anything, but they had season-long ones. But what it was is you got teams. You got a passing offense, you got a rushing offense, a passing defense, a rushing defense. So that kind of set the groundwork, because basically in college, I kind of believe it's more systems than players, so you knew which players you wanted to target just by what school they went to. So that was kind of my crossover into that, and both the college sports have always kind of been my passion.
All right, well, let's jump right into this week. It is week 11 here in college football. And it's funny because, we pine for the conference games, and we now obviously are in the thick of that. The season seems to be almost winding up, but this is kind of a dud of a week in terms of looking at a lot of these matchups. But you know what? We've got a monstrous tournament, $100,000 total payout over there on DraftKings this week for a simple $27 buy-in, so I hope everybody checks that out. FanDuel, of course, will be running their, I believe, $100,000 or $200,000 tournament in a couple of weeks as well. And, of course, they have their King of the Campus, their $500,000 tournament, which will be happening over bowl season, so you can certainly cue into that if you don't want to pony up $200. So this industry, or this sport, is definitely growing in popularity, and once you get into it, tell you, it doesn't really get much better. Just a ton of fun. Except, of course, when you roster Kyle Allen, and he sucks last week, as we were all kind of bit by that a week ago, and I'm sure he will definitely come up in today's conversation just a little bit. But before we do that, we want to kind of start with the odds this week and kind of look at which games you want to get the most exposure to, because honestly, Vegas is one of the best, if not the best, indicator of what's going to happen, the number of points being scored in these games. So if you're not paying attention to it and trying to get exposure to these high-scoring games, you're basically doing yourself a disservice. So looking at our old free tool in our daily research drop down here on Roto Grinders, we got Baylor and Oklahoma at 73.5. UTEP and Western Kentucky, game not available on DraftKings but is on FanDuel, 70.5 in that one. Colorado, Arizona, 69. A&M, Auburn, 67. Georgia State, Troy at 64.5. Louisiana, Lafayette, New Mexico State, 64. Boise State, New Mexico, 63. So again, you look at all these kind of smaller schools, not a whole lot of the big marquee names out there, but Baylor, Oklahoma definitely does kind of stand out. The spread is less than a touchdown in that game, so I'm sure we'll be talking about a good number of players from that matchup. But this is the way we're going to structure the show for you today. Early slate, we're looking at DraftKings because they've got the 100K tournament, and it is early only. Late slate, we'll kind of turn our attention to FanDuel here. So that's how we're going to kind of examine these slates today for the next 50 minutes or so. Okay, Jesse, we'd like to start with the quarterback position, and I have to say I thought that DraftKings did pretty good with salaries this week. It didn't look too light, not too difficult. I think they actually hit it right on the head. Can't say the same for NFL, but I'll tell you, this week in college, I'm pretty happy with the setup. It's fair.
I agree. Not as many quarterbacks as I normally want to roster, which makes it interesting with the big tournament where you want to throw a whole bunch of entries in, because I don't like a whole lot of the quarterbacks, but I think they did a wonderful job on the pricing.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's just a weird slate altogether, and for it to be the one that we've got all the marbles riding on, it's going to make it kind of difficult to navigate. But let's start on the high end. I really like both of these guys. Nick Marshall against A&M, home game, obviously Auburn right now in that Final Four. I guess, committee that they put together. So long way before that pans out. Lots of games to be played, but obviously in contention for to make the finals. And then Bryce Petty at 9,400. How do you rank them? Who do you like better between Petty and Marshall this week?
I like Marshall better. Definitely in cash games. Probably in the tournament they're about equal, but I'll always lean to the guy that runs the ball. I mean, it's just for sure points. Petty's good too, but I just feel like you get the more for sure points out of Marshall.
And it's weird to see Petty not run as much. I mean, look at 7 for 11, 11 for -9, 10 for 23. This is a guy who rushed for a ton of touchdowns a year ago, and I don't know if this is just kind of an issue with the injury that took place earlier with him, but you're right. That component is that missing kind of hurts a good bit here going against Oklahoma. But that total is the biggest on the day. This is a real statement game for Baylor. I mean, I think obviously they have to win this game if they want to have any chance to make it at the very end. They already right now Baylor, who'd they lose to? West Virginia? Is that the loss that they had?
I believe so.
Yeah, so they obviously can't trip up, and I think that it's going to be a pretty competitive game. But below them, you've got a guy like Everett Golson. Last week he had 6 total touchdowns. Are you afraid of him at all? I mean, it's a road game. Look at Arizona State's defensive numbers over the last 3 or 4 weeks. Pretty good. Any ambivalence in rostering Golson this week?
Well, when the first came out, I kind of had Golston listed as possibly my number 1 quarterback, and then the more I dug into it, it just wasn't quite adding up to being the top guy. I mean, I think if you're playing multiple lineups, you have to put him in there. But I mean, normally Notre Dame plays slower paced games. I mean, they don't normally play high total games. Arizona State, they have been, but now they've been coming down a little bit too. So I still think he's hands down the number 3 guy, but he's a full step below the top 2 in my mind.
You got a total of 59.5 and a pretty even line between these two. Notre Dame projected at 28.5 points. I mean, I think his salary is right where it needs to be. It's not, obviously I think if he was at where Marshall and Petty are, you kind of ignore him, but you do get a little bit of savings from those guys. And then you look at what's below him, and, he stands out as, a much more surefire play than you get in some of these other guys. Now, Trevor Knight against Baylor. What do you think of him?
Well, I think after last week, you kind of have to look at him. I mean, that running kind of came out of nowhere, but won't even look at him in my cash games. I just not quite there. You just never know what Oklahoma's going to do on offense. I mean, a couple weeks ago they were running the ball 40 times a game. Now, I mean, they're starting to open up again, but they kind of bring a different game plan to it each week, which is good in real football, but in fantasy football, I just don't like that uncertainty. So he'll make some of my lineups, but none of my cash game lineups. The nice thing about him is you can pair him with a receiver, which is good, and that's what he's got over some of the other guys. The other guys, Marshall, you can't pair with anyone. Petty, which one do you pair him with? Golson, I don't really know if you can pair him, but the nice thing about Knight is you feel comfortable pairing him.
Yeah, that would be Sterling Shepard. He's supposed to be back healthy this week. But, I mean, I think the thing about Trevor Knight is last week was an outlier performance. 146 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns. He hadn't rushed for 3 combined rushing touchdowns before that game. I don't know if he's rushed for a combined 146 yards before that game. So that was basically a career performance for him. He's not going to put up another 50-burger this week, even against a high-scoring, high-paced game in Baylor. So I think that there's going to be people reaching for that, and I'll have limited exposure, I believe, to him. But let's move down a little bit, because I think this is where it gets really interesting. Those are the marquee names, but now we start moving into, okay, I want to be able to roster a Melvin Gordon or a Nick Chubb or a Tevin Coleman. You're going to have to find some value out there at the quarterback spot. So I'm going to open it up to you first. Give me a couple of the guys that you're eyeing here in the middle or low tiers.
Well, I guess I'd call this the lower middle tier. I know he kind of, you're just talking about reaching for performance, and I'm banking on a lot of people doing that on Knight. That's why I want limited exposure like you do, because I think he's going to be way too highly owned, people just looking back to one game. But I personally like Anthony Boone because I think you pair him with Crowder, and I mean, Crowder should be a stud. I mean, hopefully these last 2 games he's turning around. So I like Boone. I like Falk. I guess I think he would be considered middle tier just because that Washington State offense, it doesn't matter who's running it. They're chucking the ball 60 to 70 times, so he just gives you a ton of upside. I mean, anytime they're on the field, you got a quarterback with 500-yard, 5-touchdown upside. So I think those are 2 good ways to go. Those are 2 of my guys I'm looking a little bit lower down.
Yeah, Falk is interesting going against Oregon State. I'm a little bit nervous because this is a road situation here. Not the easiest place to play. Oregon State's defense isn't bad. They're not Colorado. They're not Cal. So I'm not going to go all in on him. That price is not a gimme at $6,600. For me, I look up and see like Dane Evans, going against SMU. And SMU is one of the worst teams out there. The good news is Tulsa's not very good themselves, so this could be somewhat competitive. And Evans has really kind of been, anchoring that team. I mean, 54 attempts last game against Memphis for 349, went for 314 against USF the game before that. And you know what? I think they're relying on him a good bit. And we talk about handcuffs. It's not cheap, but if you put him and Lucas together, their top wide receiver, that's about as dynamic of a duo as you could get based on the opponent that they're facing. So I'm going to throw Dane Evans as somebody I'm definitely going to have some exposure to. I don't mind Anthony Boone, and I hate this because last week I was out at the cocktail party, Florida, Georgia. Every week prior to that, and when I was making multiple lineups, I would always do a Boone Crowder because I knew, if they're going to have a 2-touchdown game, Boone is going to get it going at some point in time. He's cheap. and boy, it's just going to be perfect. I'm going to have tons of cap room, and nobody's going to see it coming. Well, I got too occupied taking Jello shots and drinking grain alcohol at the cocktail party that I'd never put that lineup in, and boy, am I regretting not using Anthony Boone and Crowder. Syracuse, again, not a very good team here at all. I could see Boone kind of following that up with another good performance. Thoughts on Hackenberg and Mannion? Now, Hackenberg gets IU, and this is a team that's one of the worst. I think they're like 119th against the pass in college football. You look at his numbers, only 7 touchdowns on the year. Obviously, the attempts are still super high here, 42, 49, 32, 45. He's just not completing them at a very good clip, but this IU defense hasn't been able to defend the pass all year long. Is this the week Hackenberg gets 2 or 3 touchdowns?
Very well could be. Personally, I would rather just drop down, even though he's been bad. I think I'd rather drop down to Trickett, but that's hasn't looked real great either. But I think you get a great combo for Trickett and White. You can save $3,000 on any time you've been playing that combo all year. Obviously, you can kind of see where I'm going with my value guys. I kind of only like to get value guys if I feel like I'm pairing them with someone, and so all my cheap guys will be paired. I mean, the Dane Evans, I kind of forgot about him. That's the perfect, you pair him with Lucas. I mean, that's to me similar to the Trickett White thing. But Hackenberg's, I can't figure that one out. That first game he had over in London or whatever it was, threw for 400 yards. I thought this was going to be a big year. Penn State would open up. Like you said, they're still throwing it, but they're not doing anything with it. I mean, it's a tough read, but I think you got to play him a little bit.
Let's move down even a little bit further here, and I talked to STL Cards, who I know you respect as much as I do, a great daily fantasy guy, been around for a while, and he threw out Kyle Allen this week, and I almost threw up in my mouth after what happened a week ago, but made a pretty interesting case for him in the fact that last game against Monroe, obviously they didn't need to air it out a whole lot. Obviously, it didn't look good when he tried to do it. But this is a game against A&M that, or against Auburn, you can expect A&M to fall behind a good bit, and he expects Allen to throw it way more than we saw last week. I mean, he only had 28 attempts, and if you look at what Kenny Hill was doing, he was about doubling that. So Kyle Allen, could this be the everybody jumps off and, he might just get enough garbage time yards to pay off a $4,800 salary, or you just soured on him completely after last week?
No, I like him a lot just because you get an A&M quarterback that is going to be as low-owned as you ever get an A&M quarterback, because there's so many people that'll just not even look at that name. They'll see it and remember what happened and won't even for the guys that didn't play him last week and are just kind of playing this week because they see the big tournament, they click on that game log, they're just closing that player card up right away and just going on to the next one. So I think it's a great play.
Yeah, I think I'll probably have a little bit of exposure to him. Not going to go all in like I did last week. Last guy I'm going to throw out who I think is underpriced is Greg Ward Jr. against Tulane. I know last week was a bit of a dud. Going against USF. But you know what? They ran the football just a ton in that game. And he was good when he threw it, 15 for 19, so an 80% completion percentage. I mean, the last 2 weeks you're looking at 80 and 88% throwing the football. So he's actually done pretty well. And, take out last week, he was at 23 and 25 against Temple and Memphis, who I believe are better defenses than Tulane. And at 4,700, I think we'd be happily taking a 25 fantasy point day. And you talk about hookups, Deontay Greenberry's another guy last week, only had 3 yards, but his price is so cheap, I think that's kind of a sneaky hookup there, QB wide receiver. Okay, moving on to running back. And, I think there's obviously some value quarterbacks to talk about. So I do think you can look at some of these running backs. Melvin Gordon against Purdue. Matchup screams about 203 touchdowns. But I've been reading he's a little bit banged up, and even seen some people say Corey Clement, this is the week to kind of maybe jump on him. But I think, to get him in, you're going to have to sacrifice at quarterback. You're not going to be able to get Marshall, Petty, and Gordon on a team. Just not going to happen. How much do you like Melvin Gordon this week?
Not much.
Not
Not much at
much.
all.
Well, I use
and
that.
and he'll, I think it's going to be a split in carries this week. When you look at, I mean, Gordon is so good, you don't realize, but it's not that far off a split in carries most week anyway. Clement gets 15 carries on average. I mean, I can see it this week being 25 carries for one guy, 20 for the other. And if you're talking a 25-20 split for what you got to pay for him, God, I know he's good, but I can't do it. I mean, I got Chubb listed as my number one guy just because you know with what's going on there, they are gonna just keep giving him the ball as much as they can. I got him, and you get to save, $1,600. So that's how I feel on Gordon this week. And normally normally even when his salary was crazy, he was a plug and play guy for me. But that injury just scares me off a little bit.
Chubb is interesting. Sony Michael's supposed to return this week, and I do believe he's going to work his way into the rotation. We already saw him kind of get less carries last week. I think that was more dictated by game flow. They just fell behind to the Gators, and he had, I think, almost 130 yards in the first half. They just fell behind and had to stop running the football. So the 21 carries, a bit less than we've seen. But I do think they might want to lighten his load a little bit. So that does kind of worry me a little bit with Nick Chubb. UK has actually been somewhat decent defensive team for the most part this season, especially at home. So I wouldn't go all in on Chubb. And then Tevin Coleman was a big fade for Cards in our college football playbook this week. Ranking-wise, Penn State ranks as the toughest rush defense, I believe, in the entire country. So you put that with the fact that they have no quarterback, and it's hard for me to roster Tevin Coleman, but you know what? I've doubted him in the past, and he seems to almost always come through. Even last week, didn't get in the end zone, but did get 100 yards. So thoughts on Coleman?
Well, Coleman's a big play guy, so to me, the defense doesn't quite dictate his stats as much as, I mean, if he gets 20 carries, he's probably going to bust one for 40 or 50, and if that 40 or 50 one goes to the end zone, I mean, you're halfway home to a nice day on one carry. So definitely, I mean, not the matchup I want, but I think if you're playing him in a tournament, you have to because, I mean, he's just so explosive.
I don't mind David Cobb at 7,400. I think he'll be under owned this week. Perrine did run pretty well last week. I'm not sure I love him depending on how that game flow goes, and Keith Ford could return. DJ Foster, Cameron Artis-Payne, two guys who look pretty underpriced this week. Once again, who do you prefer between those guys?
Probably Artis-Payne. I mean, Foster, I can't figure him out. I thought he was going to be a top 3 running back. I basically thought it would be him with Gordon and Gurley as the top 3 fantasy backs this year, and he just, ever since that injury to Kelly, he kind of hasn't been the same guy. I mean, they've been focusing on him, and I mean, I think just because of that receiving ability and all that, you got to play him a little bit, but I just think Auburn's going to pound the ball, and he'll get his. Payne will get his. So
yeah, Foster's interesting too because I agree with you. Like, he's getting a lot more passing in that offense than he had before. And if they were losing games, I could see them like, okay, we got to feed our horse, DJ Foster. But, they're winning games. Beat Utah, beat Washington the last couple of weeks. I don't see them necessarily making a change in that game plan because it seems to have been working for him. He's underpriced. I will have him on a couple of tournament teams just because he is a very big play guy. He is one of those guys who can give you 40 fantasy points this week. Not a lot of guys can. He undoubtedly can. So at 6K, I think you need some exposure to him. I think for cash, Cameron Artis-Payne is absolutely the way to go between those two. Okay, let's move down a little bit, middle tier to lower tier running backs. I think Falston at Notre Dame, he's really kind of taken over the lead role there. I don't see any reason not to consider him this week. Weissman against Minnesota. You're up there in Minnesota country. 5,500. Usually you don't see a running back who has scored 2 touchdowns or more in 5 straight games be below 6K, but Weissman is. Do you like him this week to keep that streak going?
I do. I do. I mean, he's a good play. The only thing that he doesn't really bring is I don't know, even with all those touchdowns, if he has 30-point upside. I mean, last week was close, but he's just a plotter. He's going to get you 20 carries, 80 to 100 yards, and 2 touchdowns, and that's great cash game plays. But he's not explosive at all. I mean, he's going to get his again. I'm sure he'll be between 15 and 25 points, probably closer to the 25. So you got to play him, but he just not explosive. So good play, but not tournament play.
Yeah, he's not. He is. You know what you're gonna get. Like I don't think he's gonna win you a tournament. In the sense of like he's just gonna go crazy. Nobody's gonna have him. But for the price point, sometimes it's plugging in guys who you're gonna get some solid production for. Like Weissman for that salary. If he gets you that 27 points, you'll take it again. Like you don't necessarily need him to go absolutely crazy. And you look at the other names around him. Farrow and Justin Jackson against Michigan. They don't have that kind of upside. Maybe you could say Shock Linwood kind of does, but haven't really been overly impressed with him lately. So I'm kind of I don't mind Weissman. I think he's somebody that nobody likes to play for the reasons that you just added, but I don't think that necessarily makes him a terrible play. Okay, throw me some more cheap guys that you're looking at this week.
Well, we already mentioned about Clement. I think he's a really good play. I don't know if I'm the only one on this guy and think I'm crazy if I say his name, but I like Zach Langer a lot. I mean, he's going to find a lot of my cash game lineups. I mean, maybe all of them. That SMU run defense is absolutely horrible. I mean, they're giving up 240 yards a game, and if you look at his game log, he has been the horse lately. I mean, I think he's a great play, 4,000. I mean, but he's kind of like that Weissman that we were just talking about. He's a boring, grinded out guy, but I think Tulsa's going to handle SMU pretty easily, even though they're not a good team either. But so I see Langer having a good week.
Yeah, I think he's going to be popular, but I think that he's going to be popular for a good reason because he's a stud. Malcolm Brown against West Virginia, coming off a real big game. Kind of like him this week in the lower tier. Sinjin Days, the running back for Georgia Tech. Zach Lasky's out. Days looked pretty good in his last start. He got 24 carries, 147 against Virginia, 22 for 110 against Pittsburgh. So clearly he's being involved in that offense. I don't see that changing here against NC State. So I think he is kind of a nice low-tier play. Woods or Ward? I mean, Washington State's rush defense is not very good whatsoever. The problem is they split, but we've seen them have some pretty good games. If you had to pick one, Ward or Woods, who would you rather have this week?
I'd probably go Ward, but that's a coin flip to me. But I'd probably go Ward still, and for no good reason.
What about this Iowa State-Kansas game? I mean, any plays in that? I think Wimberly and Avery look like the running backs. I know we neglected to talk about the Kentucky quarterback in the opener as well. But, ISU just gave up a crap load of points to Oklahoma. Is there any plays in this game whatsoever to look at? I mean, looking at the total in this one, I think it's sitting at 55, so 29 and 25 projected points for the two teams, so not terrible, and everybody seems to be cheap. So just your thoughts on that game in general.
Well, I'm going to have some exposure to it. I just don't think it's going to be in the running game. There's some passing game that Iowa State hasn't been that bad of a fantasy team once you start looking at some game logs and stuff. I mean, they get no exposure, and they don't go huge, but they give you some value. But I won't be focusing on that one in the running game.
What do you think of this Michigan running back who got all this Drake Johnson? He kind of went crazy last week, 16 for 122. He's only 3,300. Total in that game against Northwestern is like 41, which is like as low as you've ever seen in college normally. But he's super cheap. Is he on your radar?
He is. Yep, he was on my bottom of my list, but I think you have to play him. And coming into the year, they wanted to have him be one of the backs, but I don't even know exactly what happened, if he got a little banged up or if he just was an afterthought there for a month and a half stretch. But I, Michigan's just a mess right now, so I think anytime they can have someone do that, they can't help but give him carries the next game.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. Kentucky, they're not really known to run the ball, but we just watched Florida steamroll this Georgia rush defense last week, and they haven't been good. Is there anybody we could even consider from Kentucky this week? I mean, I'm trying to look up and down the list here, and I'm not seeing a whole lot. What do you know about that situation?
Well, if you're going to do it, I'd just go Towels. I would just, or whatever his name is, that quarterback. I watched one Kentucky game all year, and it was against Mississippi State. I don't know if you watched part of that game, but I was like, this kid is great. I mean, he outplayed Prescott that game.
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of exposure to him last week, and, well, I found out why his price is where it is and why his stat log was there, because then I watched last week, and it wasn't quite as impressive. But he's definitely got talent, but if there's any exposure, it'll be him on that Kentucky side.
Okay, moving to wide receivers quickly. We got a whole other game set to do. Keeban Lucas or Kevin White, who you prefer this week?
Lucas. I mean, White's on a little bit of a slump. I don't know. I've been hearing some people say there's tape on him. They know how to guard him now. I think he's good enough. He's unguardable for the college guys. I think it's just that they've had other options. But Lucas is the guy. SMU's horrible. I just like that matchup better.
Yeah, Texas got a pretty good defense too, and Lucas, he just gets volume, full point PPR, and DraftKings kind of makes it pretty easy play there. Okay, Corey Coleman or Antoine Goodley if you wanted a Baylor receiver. Got Coleman. Looks like he's about $600 more than Goodley.
I mentioned this in my write-ups, probably starting about a month ago. I just play who's ever cheaper. I mean, so in tournaments, probably get exposure to both. But I mean, when everyone was on Goodley huge a month ago, I said play Coleman just because everyone will be on Goodley, and they're 1A and 1B. I really don't think they have a number one guy, so I like Goodley better this week just because of that. You never know which week which one it's going to be.
Yeah, I think I'm giving Goodley the edge for that price discount that you can get on him. You mentioned Jamison Crowder been playing pretty well. Do we have a status on River Craycraft? He didn't play last week. Do you have any idea, any update on his injury status this week?
I don't, and I'm really hoping to get something because, like I said, I'm going to be playing some Falk, and it's basically trying to figure out who to pair him with is a tough one. But Craycraft is a little cheaper than he should be just because of the injury status. So if he's playing, I think he makes a good play, but I haven't heard anything yet.
Yeah, I'm gonna stay away from that situation even if he plays. I think I'd rather go up and spend $300 more and get Maley. I mean, he at least had a rapport last week with him. I mean, Craycraft, you never know with these receivers and quarterbacks. How comfortable they're going to be with each other. So at least we know with Maley, he's going to be the apple of his eye. He already was once. So I'm going to kind of give him the edge over Craycraft if you want exposure to that Washington State pass game. You got some kind of middle-tier guys to look at. Any of these Oklahoma State wide receivers interest you? Bolden or Villaman, who was monstrous last week?
Yeah, he was monstrous. I still would go Bolden if I was going there. I don't really buy into one game. Bolden's been the better one throughout the year for the most part, but I'm not going to have a whole lot of exposure to either one of them. But
I kind of like John Harris against West Virginia. He's been pretty good this year. Look at these game logs. He's had a few duds worked in, but 24, 25, 26, 20, 16, 20, 27. So you take out that 4 and that 7-point day, and I mean those are the makings of a 65, 7K wide receiver. He's 5,200 for Texas. So game which should have some points. I will say this much: that total is pretty low. Was it 51? I think I saw. kind of worries me a good bit. I know West Virginia's offense is slowed down a little bit, but if I was going to project a total in that game, I probably would have had it about 57, 58 at least. So that was a little bit surprising for me. I think my absolute must-start of the week is Duke Williams on Auburn at 4K. I mean, he's a stud. He's their best wide receiver, and he's cheaper than Sammy Coates. I think he's the guy I want this week.
Absolutely. I mean, he's such a good receiver. He'll be an NFL receiver. I really believe that. It's just that he plays for Auburn, so people, if you don't watch football, you don't realize how good he is. But if for some reason A&M can hang with him, Williams is the guy you want to play when it's going to be a close game. I mean, if they're going to have to throw the ball, Williams is a very, very good receiver. So, and then you can pair him with Marshall, and you got a cheap combo. And if Williams even catches a touchdown but only has 3 catches for that salary, he pays himself off, and then you get whatever Marshall gets too.
Totally agree. Any other sneaky guys down low that you're looking at? Give me like 1 or 2 guys below 4K.
Below 4K, well, I got a couple right above 4K. Greenberry, obviously, he's great play. Lazard for that Iowa State game, if you were talking about that, we kind of mentioned that one a little bit. I'll probably get a little bit of action going on that one. Joseph, possibly, Darius Joseph, just because the Tulsa being as bad as they are, maybe SMU can actually hang with them and play a decent game. He's got some serious upside, but I won't have a whole lot going on in there. But there is a couple guys right above 4K that I really like.
Okay.
So the first one is Deshaun Fox. Don't know if you've seen any of that game last week, but Fox he's kind of a sneaky play, and he could put up an absolute dud. But they're using him a little bit at quarterback in an option offense, so he brings some huge upside, and he is an explosive guy. He has touchdowns of basically 68 and 88 yards the last 2 weeks, so he's definitely explosive. So he's there, and then I also like Pierre Garrett for Tulsa. I just think Tulsa's going to do whatever they want on SMU. So if you want to go with a cheaper combo, and free up a lot of cap space, you can go that combo. Instead of going Lucas, you can go with Garrett and free up some money there. And then Isaiah Myers, if you want to pair him with Falk too. Myers is really cheap, and I mean he has had some really big games. He hasn't been doing it as much lately, but if Craycraft mixes, that even gives him a little bit better shot of having a big game.
Yeah, Garrett's sneaky too because he came off that injury last week and 5 for 52. I don't know what the targets were in that game, but I watched it a good bit, and Garrett was definitely getting a lot of looks in that offense, so he kind of looked the part and picked up his first touchdown of the season. I could definitely see him having a nice game against SMU. Okay, real quick, I don't spend too much time on tight ends because it's just a pain in the ass to kind of have to deal with here. EJ Bibbs at 3,700. I think that's pretty low price when you can get him below 4K. Max Williams, love him every week at 3,200. And punt play for me, Ben Koyak at min salary. So there you go. Those are a few tight ends out there. All right, let's move to FanDuel real quick. Late slate over there. And we'll start with the quarterback spot. And you got Marcus Mariota. It's a tougher game, I think people realize, going against Utah on the road. And, you get Hundley going against Washington, who lost one of their top defenders. And then, obviously, Jameis Winston against Virginia. So, those top 3 guys, how do you rank them?
Mariota by a long shot. I write this up every time I write about Mariota. The tougher the game, the more I want to play him. I just think if close game, if you get 4 quarters out of him, he's going to get you 30 minimum every time. And he runs more in the tough matchup games. He's number 1 to me every week almost. So, but he's Mariota, Hundley, Winston is kind of. Virginia's got a good defense. They haven't been playing as good as they were at the beginning of the year, but that's not going to be a pushover game. Florida State really hasn't impressed me all that much. I'm sure he'll get his, around 300 yards and 2 to 3 touchdowns, but for that salary, that isn't enough.
I kind of agree with you there. The one thing that is interesting with Winston, I kind of like him. He's kind of sneaky, but I did realize that they play Miami next week, so could have a little bit of a look-ahead game here. for Florida State against the in-state rival coming up next week. Really, I like Hundley every week. Check the weather up there in Washington, though. That can be a nightmare sometimes. Just, the rushing yards he gets you alone just kind of is amazing every single week. It's like 100 yards rushing, 131, 110, 94, 89. And, he hasn't thrown for 2 touchdown passes in the last 2 games. So if he rights that ship a little bit, you're looking at mid-30s, and you'll take that all day long at 10-2. Okay, let's move down a little bit, and let's talk about Kansas State TCU real quick. You got Boykin and Waters. The Vegas total, let's see what Vegas has this one at 57.5, kind of lower. TCU was involved in a game with in the 80s, I think, last week, or maybe not that high. Maybe it was in the 70s, but definitely the highest one on the board. Boykin has had some monstrous weeks. How are you looking at this matchup, and thoughts on those quarterbacks?
I like both of them. I actually have both of them. I had a Winston myself. I've been a Waters guy all year long. I've been probably a Waters guy even when everyone else wasn't a Waters guy. But I think if I were to pick one, it would be Boykin just because they're at home. I think the TCU defense is better than the K-State defense. But K-State's kind of flying under the radar. They are a good team. They're a really good team. But both of them are good plays. I personally would just pay up to go to Hundley or Mariota. But, I mean, if you're playing multiple lineups, I think you got to get exposure to them.
Yeah, I think what I would do is I definitely think I don't know. I think it's going to be lower scoring. You look at some of the stats here. Kansas State's a team, doesn't turn it over at all. I think they only have 7 turnovers all year long. TCU leads I think, college football in turnovers and points off turnovers. So that's really, I think, helped springboard their offense themselves. So we don't give a whole lot of betting advice here, but I like the under in that game with Kansas State and TCU. I really like Anu Solomon against Colorado, 8,800 on FanDuel in this late slate. Pretty decent price for him there. How about some of these smaller school guys? Hedrick, going against UNM. He's somebody who has really lit it up the last few weeks. You're looking at 40 fantasy points, 24, 28. Got off to a slow start, but he's kind of turned it around a little bit. And what's your thoughts on J.T. Barrett? He's probably the lowest price we've seen. Going against arguably the toughest defense, certainly in the Big Ten in Michigan State. So do you just stay away because the matchup isn't prime for him, or is this one of those games where they're going to need him to do everything if they want to have a chance to win? Thoughts on Barrett?
I just not on Barrett. I admit that Michigan State defense scares me. Wouldn't blame anyone if they threw him in a tournament team because you got to throw guys in tournament teams, but that defense is good. I just stay away is my advice on that one. There's just too many other plays for the same price that have good matchups.
I agree. Okay, let's go down to the lower level. Find me a cheap quarterback or two in the late slate you like.
Like Joe Gray. Don't know.
He looks legit, doesn't he? I mean, seems like his game logs are legit. 25 fantasy points. Almost each of the last 4 games.
Yep, and then you got Tyler Rogers. I mean, that's a boom or bust play. That's one that I'm not recommending to play in your cash games, but he has a really good receiver. He's a decent quarterback. I mean, he can throw up some big games, so he's down there at 6,000, so you free up a lot of cap space if you go him. But that's a tournament play. But I always pay up for quarterbacks, so I don't look too much down the list. But I mean, those are 2 of the guys that caught my eye a little bit.
Especially on FanDuel, you only get one of them, so you don't want to whiff. Kyle Allen.
Right.
Okay, Devin Johnson and Jay Ajayi, they are really expensive. I faded Devin Johnson all year long. I'm going to keep fading, and it's been not worked out well for me at all. But at 11-1, I mean, Southern Miss is a bad team, but I mean, you're looking at a guy almost needing to score 3 or 4 touchdowns to get to that. He's done it. He's been over 30 fantasy points his last 4 games, but it's still asking a lot. So I don't know if I can pay 11-1 for Devin Johnson. What about you?
I can't. I at least have been a little bit luckier than you by the sounds of it. I don't know if I've played him yet on FanDuel, but I played him a lot on DraftKings and some of the other sites. So I've at least evened myself out on the Devin Johnson train. So, but I can't pay that much for him. For some reason, I just still don't want to believe that he's that good. And then you got Cato there. It just always scares me that they're going to just rely on Cato some game, and he's going to go for 5 touchdowns. And how much does that leave for Johnson?
Yep, it's a scary proposition. It's easy to say no at 11-1 though. So let's move down a little bit. Paul Perkins is intriguing just because he's been so consistent all year long. So I'm going to throw him as a possible play here. I do like Ajayi every week. He's just kind of the guy who just that offense moves through both through the air and rushing the football. Doubled 2 touchdowns in each of the last 3 games. So he's pretty much a lock for about 25 fantasy points or more. So I like him pretty much every other week. Thoughts on Devontae Booker this week against Oregon?
Booker's a good play. Even though we just talked about they're a good team and they should be able to hang with Oregon, it still scares me that Oregon's so explosive. They can get up 3 scores on you, and it might take him somewhat out of the game. So I don't like playing running backs against Oregon. It's kind of just one of my rules, so I won't be on them a lot. And on FanDuel, I've been riding this all year long, and it hasn't hurt me too bad. Of my, 60-70% of my guys I play are from the schools that no one knows about on FanDuel. That's where all the value is. So I play a lot of those guys. So.
Well, this week, McGuire of ULL, Louisiana Lafayette against New Mexico State is, they got 2 running backs there. They've both been just amazing lately. Do we just ride this train another week, you think?
I'm gonna. I think McGuire is the one they want to be the guy. He's more explosive. He's everything. It's just they don't want to give him the whole workload because they run it a lot. But he's good. You got to play him. He catches the ball. He's a good play. And then right above him, same game, Larry Rose. He's a really good player too. I'm going to have a lot of action to those guys. 7,600. That's a pretty good price, and just hope that game goes high.
What about the Florida running backs in the late slate? You've got Jones, and then you've got Kelvin Taylor. Both of these guys went nuts last week. They give Vanderbilt, and it's a big game here for Florida. Believe it or not, they're not quite, I don't think, out of contention yet for they might be. I'll have to double check. But, they've been pretty bad, but, this is obviously Muschamp fighting for his job and trying to win now with style points. Obviously going to have a lot of confidence, and they didn't even attempt to really pass the ball against Georgia. I don't see them doing that once again. Do you like these guys for value at all this week?
I do, somewhat. After that week, they're going to pound it again, and Vandy's bad. I just think it's going to be an even split in carries, but they're good cash game guys. I tell you the truth, I think they'll probably both go over 100 again, but with both going over 100, that doesn't really leave a whole lot for either one for upside.
Yeah, I think that Jones is the one I want over those two. Taylor definitely looked better. Broke a couple really nice runs, but I don't know. If I had to pick one, I'd pick Jones, but you're right. It's a kind of scary proposition. I see something here that we got a questionable status on Alonzo Harris. He would be out, then just queue up McGuire in all your games because then he'd get the full workload, and that would be terrific. How about this defensive player turned running back for Washington? What's his name?
I can't think of it. That's why I started kind of laughing when you said his name, but I can't think of who it is. I'm scared of that situation. I don't know what we got going on there. So
his name is Shaq Thompson. There you go.
Yep.
He is available on FanDuel. 15 for 174 last game, 21 for 98. I think that they want to go. I don't see a reason now to change. You've been pretty successful doing this. They didn't have much success even running the football when Coleman and Washington were healthy. I'm not scared off, to be honest with you. A home game here, and the one little worry I have is Washington, I think, lost that key defender, so maybe they'll look at Thompson and say, we got to put him back on defense. I don't know the specifics of positions and this and that, but I don't hate that price tag at 5,900. So I'm gonna say he is somebody that you definitely look at for your tournaments, and I think he's somebody to kind of maybe be a guy who could do it once again for you at a pretty cheap price tag. Joey Losefa is supposed to return for Hawaii. He was actually pretty good before he got his DUI. Was also kind of hurt before then, but he should be healthy. You just never know off of suspension if they're just going to hand the job right back to him or not. So that's the one kind of concern that you have. And plus, he hasn't played in a live game in a while. But look at some of his carries: 35, 191, 37, 150, 28, 154. So he's a tournament play for me. But just keep your eye on that situation. How about running back at Arizona? Wilson, Grigsby, or neither?
Neither. And man, they actually got 3 good running backs, but I can't play any of them. I mean, if all of a sudden one of them's the guy, it's a great play, but I think it's just a stay away right now.
Okay. Quickly, on any other running backs that you like that we didn't talk about?
Not really. I mean, we might as well move on. We're running a little late here. There's a lot of wide receivers I got. So.
Okay, well, you got a lot of wide receivers, so I'm going to give the floor to you in the late slate. So I'll let you get started. Give me some of your top guys.
Well, basically the small schools I were talking about, I think this slate's loaded with good value. I mean, that's why I didn't have much running backs to talk about, and I talked about Mariota because, I mean, you got Lucky Whitehead, you got Winston, you got Morgan, like all those guys. You got Joe Hansley. He's kind of one that most people won't even be on if Higgins is out, which it sounds like he is. I mean, they're not going to just not have a number 1 receiver. They're going to want to throw the ball. I mean, I think he's in there. Those are kind of the cheap guys I got. And Devontae Parker, it looks like he is legit. I mean, I played him the last 2 weeks, luckily, and I had a pretty low ownership last week because they were going up against a tough team. So he's a little bit more expensive, but he's out there too. Those are some of the main guys I'm looking at.
Yeah, Parker is looking awesome. I mean, when he did that against Florida State, you've got to like his chances to do it against BC. And, yeah, I think he's a great kind of high-end play. If you had to pick Cooper Spruce or Rashad Green this week, who'd you rather have?
I would probably go Spruce just because I think that's going to be a really high-scoring game. Alabama, LSU isn't what they have been, but you never know if that, I mean, it's at LSU, night game. I mean, you never know when they're going to come out and play. They're going to be up for it. It's Alabama, so he's good, but I'm off him a little bit this week. So I'd probably go Spruce, Green, Cooper, even though I think Cooper's the best one out of the group.
Yeah, 45.5 the number in that game, Alabama LSU. So the thing about Cooper is he gets so much of that workload. I mean, he is the guy that Sims goes to pretty much every single time. So he does have that going for him. Caleb Jones, I like him at 7K. He's pretty consistent week to week. Should be in a good spot. Tommy Schuler all the way down to 5,800 on FanDuel. Maybe. I don't know. If you're playing Cato, I guess you could do that, but I've done that. I should just do it because, the 1 week I didn't do it with Boone and Crowder, look at it hit, so I should just do it. Just another Cato Schuler on one team. Cross my fingers. And, yeah, I think that kind of hits up on it. I always talk about Devin Allen. He's cheap, 5K. If you like Mariota, you certainly don't have to pair him up with somebody, but he's the guy I always like to use. But you know what? They've been using a lot of other guys that Stanford's been getting a lot of looks. Dwayne Stanford the last couple of weeks as well. Byron Marshall. So pretty crowded. So just GPP only play for those guys. All right. Well, what about TCU wide receivers? Do you like them at all?
Yeah, I do. It's just I had been hitting that one right, and boy was I wrong on that last week. So he's gonna throw for yards. It's just, is it gonna be back to Dotson, or is it gonna, or isn't it gonna be? So I'll probably stay off of that. I might have a little bit of Dotson, but I don't think I'll go back to Gray.
All right, you're the master of the smaller school guys. So is there any small school tight end that we need to roster this week?
uh, not really.
Not really. So, okay, that makes it easy. So then we can look to the big schools.
Yeah. I mean, how you were. I do not like spending on tight end. I think this is a really soft salary in the late game. So what I'm, this will probably be an outlier this week. How you were talking about pairing Mariota, I'll probably actually pair him with Brown. So just actually spend the extra 1,500, get a tight end that can actually go for 80 yards and a touchdown. So that's probably going to be the way I go. Stephen Shu, I think is how you pronounce the name. He's good for catches, but there's not a whole lot. Oh, I know the one guy that bigger school, but I like Price too from
Yeah.
Michigan State. He's a good touchdown guy. I mean, if you're going to go cheap, I would just go him because he gets that touchdown. You've already hit value.
Yeah, Jake Rose, another guy, same price. I don't even mind O.J. Howard a little bit. Probably not this week, but he's definitely been getting more involved in that offense. So if you want to kind of go with somebody that I don't think is going to be overly popular, he might have a little bit of upside for you. So there you go. That is it. It's been about an hour. We are done for College Football After Dark this Thursday. Jesse, can't thank you enough for pinch hitting this week just because you kind of dropped in. I'm wishing you all the luck this week, so I want to see you win something big. How about second place to me in that 100K tournament on DraftKings? Would you take that?
I would, but I'd rather reverse those spots. But how about we just put like 5 out of the top 10 between us, and whoever gets the first, we'll roll with it.
Done deal. I like the sound of it. So definitely check that tournament out on DraftKings. FanDuel, great. Lots of different slates, too. Early, late, late, late. That's a real fun thing about playing on that site. It's like a whole bunch of college football days in one. So check them out as well. Fantasy Aces, a fun game. So lots of different options out there for your college football enjoyment. Do join Cards and EMAC. They will be with you on Saturday morning, 10:30 to 11:30, talking more great college football fantasy goodness. And till next week, I'm Dan Bach for Mr. Hesters 8157, Jesse Anderson. Have yourself a great night, everybody, and we will talk to you again next week. See you.